and the organizations briefly, and I'll leave them to tell you even more. So our first speaker for today is Alex T. He's an impact investor and TBN's Resilience Program Lead. He is passionate about quality enterprises that create value for others, serving the common good. He was the COO of Garden Impact Investments, a social impact fund, and CEO of Bank of America Singapore Limited, a global investment bank. Our next speaker is Mason Tan, the founder/CEO of Garden Impact Investments, a Singapore-based investment holding company that focuses on making investments in commercially sustainable, scalable businesses that impact communities mired in poverty. He had worked in a securities and money broking firm in Indonesia, corporate finance manager, investor relations for NYSE-listed company based in Singapore, and CFO of an internet venture funded by BCS. Our next speaker is Hui Hsing, the co-founder of Blue 7, a Singapore-based impact investor founded by Dr. Juanita Fu and Hui Hsing in late 2016. It invests in sustainable business models with bold and effective solutions addressing undeserved needs in livelihood resilience, community development, and environmental protection. We directly support passionate entrepreneurs to address these problems by developing capital in creative ways. Hui Hsing has a 20 years career in global healthcare investment, corporate finance, and general management. Our last speaker is Lee Han Shih, the founder and head of Potato Productions Group of Companies, which is a group of a dozen companies involved in education, food security, investment, media, translation, and data visualization. It is also the founding partner of the Asia Pacific Center for Refugee Studies at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, as well as a partner of the Center of Human Rights and International Justice at Stanford University. Moderating our workshop today is Tristan Ace, the Global Lead, Partnerships and Development, Social Enterprise and Creative Economies from the British Council. He leads the British Council's work in social enterprise and impact investment in the Asia-Pacific region and is responsible for the flagship policy and government engagement program. Without further ado, please join me to welcome our speakers and our moderator to share with us. Speakers and moderators, please.
Great, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Soristic team for organizing this event and for being such fantastic research partners for our social enterprise landscape survey that we're currently undertaking in Singapore. We've been delighted to work with Soristic as our research partner and of course Raise as well. And we are planning to launch the survey in the coming months, so please watch this space. And I believe that all the people on this call were kind enough to give up their time to complete our survey. So thank you to everyone on the call for contributing to the survey. And we hope, and I'm actually very sure that the results will be very useful for you and for your work as well. And we hope to engage you when we come to launch the survey sometime towards the end of this year. So thanks for the introduction. I'm Tristan Ace and I lead the British Council's work across the Asia Pacific with a particular focus on research and policy. So we've been doing a lot of work in partnership with a number of organizations, including United Nations ESCAP, ABPN, of course, I'm sure you're familiar with, and of course, governments across the region in looking at how we can create an enabling environment that can help social enterprise and impact investments to flourish across the region. So this workshop, this program really falls within that area. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to moderate the conversation this morning. I understand we have about 40 minutes or so to hear from, oh no, a bit more than that, sorry. We have about an hour or so to hear from some real experts in the field who can share some real life examples of their experience with impact investments. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them. And of course, there will be also an opportunity for questions and discussion as well. So without further ado, I'm going to invite each of our speakers just to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their investment philosophy. And perhaps what I'm interested in is perhaps take a little step back and also ask them how they became involved in impact investment, because looking at their biographies and hearing their biographies, they've all had careers before moving into impact investment. So I'm very keen to hear what it was that inspired them to get involved in this new area of finance. So perhaps I can begin with Alex. So Alex T, perhaps we can begin with you as TBN Asia Resilience Program Lead. Over to you for your introduction, a little bit of a history of why you got involved with this area.
Sure, thanks Tristan, and thank you Soristic for this platform. I'm actually both a homeschooling father, I do that in the mornings, and an investor, impact investor in the afternoons and the other time that I have, and I help to lead one of the pillars, the resilience program at TBN. My foray into impact investing began with the recognition that work or business and doing good should not be bifurcated. So the traditional model of making lots of money doing something that's ultimately trivial, whether in our business or individually, and then giving some of the proceeds to charity is the model that I've increasingly grown to reject. There is a place for charity, but I came to see that businesses can and should be a way of achieving the ends that we want to see in our world. So the mission of business should not be divorced from the good that we want to see. In terms of investment philosophy, I believe that first and foremost, and sometimes we miss this because of how readily available investments are, especially in the public markets, but I believe first and foremost, investing is about ownership. So it requires us to ask ourselves as investors the question, what sort of companies do I want to own? Are these the companies that I'll be proud to talk about because they transcend the value of simply money? You know, personally, I want to invest, I want to support companies that serve the common good, companies who bring out the best in people, you know, who help them become all that these people are meant to be, who protect and regenerate the environment. In other words, you know, companies that create value rather than merely redistributing or worse, you know, destroy value. So, you know, they say contrast is the mother of clarity. So I'll stay away from companies that get people into an endless cycle of consumption, for example, you know, that thrive on more consumption on the part of its customers to satisfy some kind of an appetite or worse, addiction. You know, this could be entertainment, this could be in the area of luxury, you know, in the public markets, for example, even REITs that charge ever increasing rents to its tenants so that sometimes they come to flounder under the weight of the rental commitment. Those I'll stay away as well. I'll take a pause here. Thank you, Tristan.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex. Thank you very much for that interesting introduction and insight into your route into impact investment and your philosophy as well. I'll now move over to Mason, my old friend Mason Tan. Over to you for your introduction.
Thank you, Tristan. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this session organized by Pauline and the rest at Soristic. Well, I'm not say stumble, I came across into impact investing after experiencing both quarter life crisis and midlife crisis. So what I have learned, you know, how do I apply my past work experience, including failures and scars and wounds, into helping. So I have this, you know, make an intentional effort to move from being a banker for the rich to be a banker for the poor, by helping to investing in companies that is not being profit driven, but being purpose driven. One of the key values that we look at as defined as purpose driven, it means it takes into account the importance of social impact metrics like jobs creation, improvement in living standards, livelihood. Poverty cycle is not as simply as by giving money, it will change their lives. Poverty alleviation need to be addressed with sustainable livelihood income. So we are in the business of investing in small growing businesses by promoting economic equity to the disadvantaged group of people, which are usually unbankable people because they don't have assets for collateral. They need patient capital, and they are more interested in to help to others than for their self-enrichment. So this is a snapshot of what I've been doing for the past 7 years at the Garden Impact Investments. I shall stop here.
Great, thank you. So thank you for sharing your experience of a personal journey towards this area of work.
Yeah.
Perhaps now I can move on to Hui Hsing and to give your introduction.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Great. So I think we very much resonate with what Alex and Mason had said. We are, Blue 7 is a startup which is funded by the family office of Dr. Juanita Fu. Juanita and myself are both professional investors in our lives in VC, particularly in biotechnology and healthcare. And I think that what we have seen is the power of capital to transform technology and innovation and ways of thinking to disrupt and provide a better standard of service and products to the marketplace. And understanding that, and also the need to take risk in such disruption flows, we looked at how we can do this in the area of serving society and the environment. And we both had gone through, the usual philanthropy, NGO routes, and essentially were a little bit dissatisfied with the outcome that channel provides. Not so much in whether it has a high impact, but rather in how sustainable the impact is. And I think this is the key to what Blue 7 tries to do. We try and deploy the power of capital and innovation in building businesses that are sustainable, that can disrupt the way we achieve impact. And so this is how we are started. We are a startup. We're very excited. This is a great area to work in. So we do all kinds of asset classes, but for today's purpose, we're very focused, and we do direct investments to entrepreneurs who want to create impact in livelihood resilience, community development, and environmental protection. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think what came across there was the idea of how you apply ideas of disruption and risk-taking to serve society. And so those trends that we're seeing in increasing business model disruption and how we can actually use that energy, that innovation, that creativity to address social and environmental problems at the same time. Great, so let's move on then to Lee Han Shih, and over to you for your insights. And I will just remind everybody on the call that I'm monitoring, and indeed our Soristic colleagues are also monitoring the chat group. So if you do have questions, please start putting in there so we can frame them and order them and then direct them back to our panelists later in the conversation. But Lee Han Shih, over to you.
Hi, thanks, Tristan. To make it short, my investment is guided by 4 principles. The first one is I don't believe in sustainability because things are already in pretty bad shape. What's the point of sustaining something that's already bad? So if you want to invest on improvement, not on sustainable. If you look at some companies, the big ones, the idea of sustainability is to turn the clock back to, let's say, 2003. I won't name a company, but this is a big pharmaceutical company. After done all the harms, they reset the clock at 2003 and they say, okay, that is the level of sustainability. That's not really. If you want to turn the clock back, you should turn back at least 30, 40 years. So sustainability is not something I go for. I go for improvement. The second thing is I don't believe in saving the environment because the environment doesn't need saving. It's the environment that human beings stay in that really requires saving. So let's not be so noble and talk about saving the environment as if we're saving the Earth. The Earth survived 4 billion years. It doesn't need us or it doesn't need our saving. We do need to save ourselves. So there's another part. The third one is that you can never assess what impact you will have in the long term. So if you invest in something today and you think that you're going to get definite impact sometime down the road, to be honest, I think you're actually bluffing yourself. You could give a kid, let's say in a remote area, good education. But what's the point if end of the day, after he got education, he can't find a job? So what is your impact? So for us, we have to, when we work closely on the ground for a long term and adjust our hopeful impact as things change. So from day one, if you look at a certain result you want to achieve, I will tell you that perhaps your chance of getting it in maybe 2 or 3 years down the road is probably 50% or less. And the fourth principle is something that I really believe in with my whole life. That is, the road to hell is paved with many well-meaning graves. If you do not really understand what you're going to do, please don't do it because you actually may create more harm than good. That's all. Thanks.
Well, okay, thank you for 4 provocative points there. I'd be very keen to hear what others think of those. I certainly share the third point around the challenge of measuring long-term impact. And increasingly, I think the idea of impact management is becoming more popular. And I think that's what you alluded to there, is the idea that it's actually about managing and being aware of your impact and not necessarily overclaiming what you're going to achieve in the longer term. And certainly point 4 around having a much deeper understanding of the particular challenge that you are addressing is also critically important as well. Okay, great. So I have a number of questions that I would like to ask our panelists, which I will do now. But again, I would remind everybody on the call that this is a fantastic opportunity to speak directly with some of the leading impact investors in Singapore and indeed across Southeast Asia. So please do use this opportunity to ask them things that might be of help and might support you in your work. But I'll go back to Alex now. And I want to kick off now with perhaps some more practical questions around, can you tell us a bit more about the investments that you've made? What are your normal deal size? What sectors do you focus on? What stages of development of social enterprise do you support? And perhaps you can give, if time, there's quite a lot there, but perhaps you can give one success, or indeed, if you prefer, maybe one of the failures would be quite interesting also for our, that indeed, if you've had any, for our participants on the call to hear about. So Alex, back to you.
Sure, thanks, Tristan. I'm sure Mason and Hui Hsing and we'll be able to speak more into this. But yes, sure. First of all, let me just start with a caveat that I must admit where I found the greatest difficulty is really the mismatch between a lot of these needs that we talked about that I see being outside of Singapore and the funds largely being in Singapore. So the lack of physical proximity for relationship building and fostering deeper trust and being on the ground has been where I've experienced the greatest difficulty. This COVID lockdown has really not helped this situation because a lot of these investments require you being on the ground and requires an extensive period of relationship building, to foster trust and all that. So we get around that issue of trust by going upstream, working with entrepreneurs through a capacity building program, attaching mentors to them, people who understand their businesses and themselves as persons, deeper and over time. I mean, I like this idea that we actually don't really know somebody unless, you know, I think the minimum of something like a year working with somebody is almost what you need to know someone, you know. So with these entrepreneurs, I think just trying to support them with lower and more amenable cost of financing, but premised upon some kind of trust that we've taken some time to build. You know, I think I just respectfully beg to defer the point about environment, because one of my favorite sectors, you know, for some time now is actually in the area of regenerative agriculture. You know, 70% of poor people are farmers. So I find that if none of our investments, and if that's not one of the areas that we look into, then in terms of actual poverty alleviation, I do wonder how we've shifted the dial, and the rate that topsoil is getting depleted and getting washed away and actually destroyed, you know, through the use of chemicals and poisons and all of that is astounding. I talked earlier about contrasting between creating and consuming, and even within the creation silo, I think there is nothing quite like creating soil, creating topsoil, rich topsoil that can go on to supply and provide, you know, lives and environment. I mean, like, I'm sure most of us here know this, but even in the area of global warming, where we know that rich soil is dark and loose and all of that, but where does it get that color from, that darkness? Where does it get that from? You know, it really gets it from the environment, and plants are the only conduits that can take carbon dioxide from the environment and break it down to release oxygen and put the carbon back into these macromolecules, these complex compounds, back into the soil, back in its proper place, you know. And that idea is fascinating to me as well. So in terms of the size of investment, personally, we have looked anywhere between 25,000 and 250,000. That seems to be our sweet spot. And like I said, we love to be making larger size investments outside of Singapore because that's really where the need is. But again, we love to really build these relationships and take time to very intentionally do that ahead of time. And that's what we've been doing, you know, all this year, all last year, since this capacity building program has kicked off. In terms of actual investments, we co-invested with Garden Impact in Agape, which is this call center that has its presence inside the Changi prison here in Singapore. And we also lent some money to a regenerative farmer, rice farmer in northern Thailand. Yeah, I'll stop here, I'll pause here.
Great, thank you. And I think your first point around the question of proximity of capital to enterprise is a very interesting one. And indeed, I was attending the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, ANDE, the ANDE Network's global conference, where they released their annual report, which looks at precisely that question around how many impact funds are in the countries where they are actually doing the investments. And I think that what was interesting was that there was a positive trend towards an increase in the number of funds, particularly across the Asia-Pacific region, being situated within the markets where they are delivering impacts. That's a positive trend, although there is still some way to go. Of course, that's based on the assumption that having capital closer to where it's needed will lead to better results for your investments. Fantastic. So Mason, perhaps I can come to you now, and the same set of questions for you.
Sure, thanks, Tristan. Yeah, so what's Garden Impact has been focusing on is providing expansion capital to small growing businesses in Southeast Asia. We are focusing on 3 sectors. First is agriculture and food. Second is inclusive community. That includes healthcare and education. And the third sector is service industry. All across these 3 sectors, our primary focus is on jobs creation for the disadvantaged group. We have been doing average project ticket size is about, I would say $500,000. Our coverage is between 250 to $2 million deal size. This is because we realize that our focus is helping such social enterprise to scale. Please also notice that we are only focusing on Series A type of companies or pre-Series A, meaning that the company need to be demonstrate post-revenue, recurring revenue generation. Just to add on what Alex have shared earlier, yes, the due diligence process is rather long compared to the traditional finance investment because almost all social enterprises do not have their own CFO or finance manager. You need to be able to help them to construct their financial statement, which is the basis of investment. Without financial statements, you cannot invest. And from there, we are also able to understand, while constructing the financial statements, understand the character. In fact, I think in social impact investing, I would say the biggest risk is character risk of the social entrepreneur, not so much about the financial risk, which I think we can be mitigated in various ways. It's the character risk. When Alex say 1 year, my longest deal I've taken is maybe 18 to 24 months to close a deal. Simply because you want to move in cautious. You do not want to put in money for the sake of putting in money. And you also want to make sure that the entrepreneurs share the same vision with our group of investors. That is actually social impact first, not financial profit first. But that is not to say profit is not important. Profit is important because without profit, you cannot deliver social impact return in the long run. So I shall stop here for now. Tristan, you're on mute. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question for you that I'll ask you to reflect on as I move to our next speaker.
Okay.
Just reflecting on the fact that you said it takes you 18 to 24 months to close a deal. How do you marry that tension that a lot of social enterprises face or impact enterprises face in the early stage with the amount of time that it takes you to get to get over the line with a deal, particularly given the pressing challenges that many of these communities are facing? Is there a way to speed up that process? Perhaps I'll get you to reflect on that for a moment, and I'll come now to Hui Hsing for your answer to the second question, but Mason will come back to you later.
Sure. That's a great question, Tristan. Maybe I should qualify by saying what took us so long was actually it was someone that we have never dealt before and we have never heard before. This is why we need to build relationship with the investment community early. Do not wait until the last minute and say you need the money next month. You expect every investor to put in money immediately. Usually I tell the social entrepreneur that, hey, you be prepared to wait at least 6 to 9 months to get it through, because first of all, like I said, they are not financially ready in terms of they don't have the data, because again, we are a fund and we have to go through our investment committee and we have to prepare investment paper. So this is a form of accountability. And therefore, that is why all the social impact investors like to be involved with incubators and accelerators so that we can, kind of foresee the runway that they need to be ready to be investment ready, to be specific on that. Again, but that is a very long process, 18 to 24 months, is simply because, especially nowadays, market conditions change rapidly, drastic changes, and we are looking at how the business can become more robust after post-COVID-19. So there's multiple factors in looking at, and plus that we cannot assume the social entrepreneurs understand the financial and legal terms and implications based on the term sheet. So it's a lot of education process along the way as well. But we still very much like to help them in a impactful way, not just in a touch and go way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So same question then over to you, Hui Hsing. Questions around a bit more information would be great about the investments that you make, the deal size you're looking at. You mentioned some of the sector already that you're interested in, but perhaps you can share a success story or a story of one of your investments so far.
Sure, Tristan, and please feel free to call me Hui Hsing. So first of all, I just wanted to say that I like the sentiments that Han Shih posed just now. I find it's rather provocative, but I think I understand the sentiment that he's trying to express, and particularly the fact that the environment does not need protection. It's actually an environment for humans. I thought that was spot on. So coming back to the nuts and bolts of what we do, pretty much like Garden and what Alex was talking about for his resilience fund, we invest 5 to 6 digit US dollar size. We do both debt as well as equity and any hybrid structures to what the spectrum that Pauline was talking to earlier in her workshop. We do pretty much the earlier stage because we find that's the big gap in the funding, and this is where essentially a family office funded investor like ourselves have great flexibility to be able to do that, fill that gap. Being also sort of VC, technology VC in our background, we understand how at the early stage, there's very little that is actually recurring. The financial forecast that we see, we pretty much look at it more to understand how management and founders think and to sort of maybe concretize a little bit more of the vision and mission and the activities that they set out in the rest of the slide deck. But we by no means expect them to actually, in fact, even in the professional VC world, very few of the forecast actually is on track if you look with the benefit of hindsight. But the important thing for us is, as what Mason said, is the management team and the impact that the team espouses. That is very important, and also their ability to pivot, to be resilient, and I'll risk using the word build something that has sustainability built into it. So having said that, what we do kind of look at is we like debt actually, because we believe at early stage and for impact, the whole exit story is very, very unclear. There's been a few IPOs in certain faraway exchanges. There's not much liquidity in that. Really, trade sale is still an option. You get bigger and maybe the other PE funds or VC funds, institutional impact funds might come in. You can be taken out by that. So in that sense, we find that, so if you go again on that whole spectrum of philanthropy to proper public investments, you know, we see impact investing for us as somewhere, you know, right of philanthropy and before the institutional guys get an interest. So we have gone into investments which are pre-commercial revenues, although very close. What we like to see there is the fact that they have partnerships with commercial entities, which is an endorsement of their business model, of their services or their products. So it's really sort of proof of concept stage. And I think I also like the point that Alex brought about for us, one of our investment strategy, because we're in Singapore, and let's face it, if there's a down cycle or problem that an Indonesian or Philippine investee faces, there's very little we can do. And particularly in COVID times, there's hardly anything we can do to help them. So we generally like to make sure that there's a co-investor base that includes either an in-country and or a industry-specific investor. It could be a strategic, you know, someone apart from the entrepreneur team who actually knows what they're doing, whether it's regenerative agriculture, it's healthcare, it's, you know, education, so that, you know, with the dips, which inevitably is the cycle of entrepreneurship, you will need someone to help you in those times. So let me just pause there. And
thank you. You made us, you re-emphasized the point there that Mason made about the importance of the management team. Is that more important for an impact investment than it is for a traditional investment? Is that something you spend more time looking at, building that relationship with the founder of the enterprise?
I think in early stage enterprises, the management team is always very important. And then depending on what, you know, if you're a biotech VC or a clean tech VC, then the technology is very important. So likewise for impact investors, it's the impact. You know, it's the impact and the management team. But everyone knows the management team is very important. Although in the other tech sectors, it is possible to change the management team. It is possible to get rid of the founder as well, as we've all heard stories of. So in that sense, the management team is less of an issue. But when you go early stage, as we do in impact, there's nothing else. You know, the technology is not patentable. It's not something you can bring in somebody else and says, okay, you know lots about how to execute this impact in Indonesia, village number, you know, 3, 4, 6, and we can hire you to do that. So, so yes, I think management team is more important in impact.
Thank you. So let's go back then to Lee Han Shih.
Right.
From your opening comments that you see a certain implied challenge to the way that impact investment is talked about across the region with some of your comments. So we're very keen to hear your approach to investment in terms of thinking about some of the deals that you invest in and the sectors that you support, and indeed some of the successes that you've had as well.
Thanks, Tristan. Well, before I answer this question, just want to say that I heard from my lawyer, she's getting a lot of deals on funds that are targeted specifically for women. So that seems to be the growing trend. And if any social enterprise really want to attract the funder, maybe if you have a women-specific target, that could actually attract a certain amount of funds. So there's one thing. This is not something I'm doing. I'm doing something similar, but I'm not really looking for women-only funding. But that is something that there's a lot of money outside. So if you're interested, I have made a number of really bad investments, and I learned from them. And the idea is that my wife always told me I embrace an idea and do not look at the execution, which is really one of my biggest flaw. So this has changed. We have a group of companies, and whatever I invest in or whoever I invest in is always to fit into our ecology that we can work together. I don't really invest in something that is totally standalone, because I think that we have a network that can add value to our investee. Our fund size, well, it really is, it can be as small as 50,000, it can go up to $2-3 million. It really depends on the size and the market and everything else. But I want to talk a bit about, well, two things I really am passionate about, particularly passionate about. One is the last mile education. We have a product called the School in a Box, which is, it took us about 7-8 years to develop with a community in the Philippines. We learn from them, and we go in with the assumptions that this is a very poor community, what UN call the level 1 or level 2 poverty. We go in assuming they do not have internet, they don't even necessarily have power, and how to provide education on that. So, well, if you go to my website, you can find some detail on that. I won't talk so much about it. But another thing, what Alex say about soil regeneration, yes, that's something that I'm very keen on, and we have a few projects going on as well, very small projects. But I want to point out that Singapore is in the midst of ASEAN. So ASEAN is 10 countries, 20 languages, 30,000 islands. Our future on food, I would say not as much on land as in the sea, because ASEAN has a tremendous amount of shoreline. And I'm involved in one of the projects is to grow and harvest seaweed in Indonesia. I think aquaculture, sustainable improvement aquaculture, could probably be the answer they were looking for. Alex is right, the topsoil are being eroded tremendously, but just think about it. There are 600 million people in ASEAN. I don't think even if you reach topsoil, there's enough land to feed everyone. So you have to go to the sea. And the sea is the part that ignored by everyone. There's a lot of issue, obviously. There's international issue, there's local issue, whatever. But really, I think the future, and I'm focusing a lot on that now, is to look at aquaculture, near shore, far shore, mostly near shore, to see how we can actually produce something or help to produce something that can feed people and actually increase the wealth of the people involved. Thank you.
Thank you. And there is there's one question here. So I will, since it's here, I will pose it to you now, Lee Han Shih.
Yes.
Also remind everybody on the call that this is now an opportunity for you to start asking questions for the panelists as well. So please do post your questions in the chat box. We have one here, so thanks for that first one. And the question is, it goes back to the point you made about not investing in standalones. Could you perhaps elaborate on what you mean by that point?
Well, basically, this, in a sense, what Hui Hsing said, and well, actually everybody said it. If it's a standalone, which means that I'm only the investor, I don't have involvement in it. It's very hard to. I like to see things that can work in synergy, and we do have a good network of potato production companies and partners that can add a lot of value to let's say startups. And I rather focus on those that I can work together rather than something that I just put the money in and walk away and hope that something good will turn up. That's what I meant by standalone.
Okay, thank you. Okay, brilliant. So now we have about 40 odd participants who are on the call, who I assume all come from social or impact enterprises. And one of the key challenges that is often discussed is the matchmaking or the mismatch making that often exists within this sector. So a question for our panelists is around the sourcing of investees. And how, so first of all, how do you go about it? Is there is there a formalized process, or is it often not luck, but it's often fortune that brings some of these deals? And if you are a social enterprise, what advice would you have for them as to how they should approach you? You know, don't want these often these unsolicited requests that might come in. So how would you advise social or impact enterprises if they wanted to approach you to start that conversation? So perhaps Alex, I can come to you. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about the resilience fund that you're leading with TBN as well, and how it might look in context.
Right. Actually, at TBN, what we're trying to do is to really build a deeper ecosystem and a deeper engagement with some of these social enterprises. So because we've had some funding around the capacity building program, and instead of actively sourcing for fresh enterprises that we could perhaps invest in or give grants to, we would like to direct them to the SET program. And what that helps us do is we journey with them formally for 6 months and then informally for up to 2 years, where the coaches are always available, where there are site visits, where they're as frequent as weekly engagements or twice weekly engagements. And we're just trying to funnel all the promising potential quality enterprises to this program, and then focus on supporting them as they go through, and then arrange for them to pitch to investors, network amongst potential investors, and bring them to these pitching sessions in order to make capital available to these guys. I think when it comes to sourcing, you really have to go pretty deep into the system. You've got to walk the ground. Personally, I haven't, it's only something I've tried to do quite actively again in the last 6 months after taking a hiatus of about 18 months or so. So perhaps Mason and Hui Hsing and Han Shih will be able to speak more into this.
Okay, great, thank you. So Mason, same question for you. Is there a logic, a formula for this, or is it often down to networks and fortune as to how you come across some great enterprises?
Yeah, to be honest, it takes time to build up a pipelines and even database. So even though now, let's say I have been involved in the social impact investing for about 8 years, I still keep a database of my first query since 8 years ago. You know, so a lot of people sometimes think, oh, because I don't invest in you, you stop communicating. You'll be surprised that because thanks to the extensive social media, you know, I'm always taking an interest in monitoring the development of each social enterprise. And maybe once a blue moon or once a year, I will send a message, how are you doing? Just to see whether the social enterprise is still alive or he's doing something new. You know, it's sometimes, like we all know, being a social entrepreneur, especially in the early stage, is a very lonely journey. And they need a lot of encouragement. So I would say today the market is much more vibrant compared to 8 years ago. You see more and more social enterprises being surfacing. And one thing I like to look at is actually those below the radar. Because I think, you know, they also deserve a support as well for those below radar. So oftentimes it's word of mouth, you know, and we also recognize that many social enterprises don't even have websites. And we are so used to doing things like based on website. And you just have to be patient, reaching out to those, oh, I heard you're doing this, you know, can you talk a bit? I'd like to find out more about your business model. You know, it's nothing else, it's just to build friendship. And often I discover many of my leads come from word of mouth, because, oh, I'm Mason, I introduced myself, I was asked by so-and-so to contact you. So in a way, it's a lead generation by itself. So I think relationship, like what everybody's saying here, is important. You don't want to work with standalone or lone ranger. You want to work with people that really have an interest in improving the society, in improving the world, not for their own self-enrichment.
And is there anything that can be done to help this, to improve this? Or is it always going to be relationship oriented? I mean, we've seen lots of initiatives around this matchmaking, trying to create these formal structures, but I often wonder whether or not that's how it works in the real world anyway, and whether or not these things would ever be actually successful.
I think today's world require everybody to be a communicator, whether in verbal or even by email. You know, I like some of the social enterprises that provide an annual message, you know, and just keep people interested going, you know, to tell people how you are doing, not just your investor, but as well to the stakeholders, you know, to your funders, to your grant makers, or even to your suppliers. Especially, I think this COVID-19 pandemic is an excellent example. You know, so do you choose to be proactive in running your business and telling your investors or stakeholders what's happening, or you wait until somebody give you a call what's happening? Because the approach, how you approach this, is also a reflection of your mental strength, your mental capability to handle the true crisis, which is something that, you know, that I personally as investor, I like to invest in failures because I know they have failed before. I know they have learned lessons, and hopefully they will not repeat the same mistakes. But this is a risk that you have to take. All investment carry risk. Over to you.
Thanks. We have a question here, so I'm going to come to Hui Hsing in a second, but I'm just going to read the question out because I think it's actually very interesting, and a question that came up and we discussed at length during the research methodology development part of our research in not just Singapore but across the region. And it's a question around, well, the question is, what are your thoughts as investors on social enterprises reinvesting 100% of their profits back to, well, back to community projects or reinvestment towards whatever mission it is that they have? Of course, that might be defined as the Muhammad Yunus social business definition of a social enterprise, where you have to reinvest all of your profits. Of course, that makes it difficult to raise capital if you can't distribute any dividends to your shareholders. So, what are the panelists' thoughts on that question? Perhaps you can also respond to that in addition to the question that I posed earlier, Hui Hsing. So back to you.
Yes. So first on the question of deal sourcing, I think this is conferences, things like that. You know, this is the pull factor. This is the easier job. You know, you get on to a conference, people know about you, and you get in the inquiries. The harder stuff is what Mason was talking about, where you have to beat the bushes. You have to go around and find a deal. And network is thing. And I'll just throw in other networks, which are, you know, incubators, accelerators, service providers, accountants, lawyers. You know, Han Shih talked about lawyers. These people are also great because, you know, when the startup gets started, they need to register, they need a COPSAC, they maybe need an audit of their accounts, etc. So these service providers are also good sources of deal flow. And sometimes they might even have advisory and other pro bono services that they throw in. So, you know, everyone and anyone, make yourself known, let people know what you're interested in, and you'll be surprised at the things that come back to you. So out of the 4 direct investments that we've made, 2 were with TBN or Garden Impact network. One was from AVPN network, that conference that we met. There was a cold call. And then another one was really, again, from a personal network from the healthcare investment side. So it's a healthcare digitech that actually addresses last mile healthcare delivery in Philippines, Cambodia, and launching into India. So, you know, we're very happy. This is a big problem for us. Due sourcing is a big problem in direct social impact investing. So please write in for Blue 7, write into info@blue7.sg. Okay, we love to hear from you. If you manage to find us on LinkedIn or anything else, you know, feel free to connect as well. So the question that was asked, you know, being early stage investors, we expect nothing less than that you invest everything that you make, if you're even making a profit, back into your enterprise, because hopefully you are a committed, you know, growth-driven impact company. And there is such a great need. I mean, you know, the poor will always be with us, you know, says the good book. So, you know, we don't expect dividends. Sometimes when we do debt structures, we do expect a coupon after a certain holidays, say 12 months, 18-month max. So we don't expect dividends being early stage. Maybe the later stage guys are a little bit different. The other area which we find interesting is this mix between NGO or social sector and social enterprise. I think that's a potential source of deal flow, and I think maybe there are entrepreneurs in that sector which hasn't actually quite woken up to the fact that they need to go also beyond their not-for-profit. And there are actually new models there as well that allows them to be originators or creators of impact enterprises. And, you know, there are instruments like outcome funds, pay for success, social impact bonds, of course, the traditional grants. But debt is something that can be used to fund those kind of business models. So we've seen a few sort of deals that started from NGOs, and then they realized that to be, again, sustainable in their financing, you know, they needed to create a for-profit arm. And then what they do was they pretty much say that the for-profit arms is to actually cross-subsidize or to complement the non-for-profit side. So I think this whole thing about whether profits can be redeployed fully back into the enterprise or even across to your NGO sister or mother is quite acceptable to someone like us.
Thank you. And have you, and this is again a question, follow-up question for all the panelists, but we're increasingly seeing innovations in the idea of blended finance, where you might have philanthropic capital that will take the first lost position in a deal, therefore enabling you to take more risk and potentially address enterprises that are at different or even earlier stages in that journey, which again potentially addresses that question of reinvestment, because you can allow for a certain, you know, perhaps a greater amounts of some of that profit to be distributed back to the investors. Are you seeing that these innovations emerge in your work across Singapore and across Southeast Asia?
I'll just take a quick stab at that. Yes, there's a group called Trisector that we came across. They did they did a pay for success project for people with disability, creating employment, and that was the outcome. I think they do a training program that ensures that the output and the outcome. The output would be the training completion, and the outcome is the employment. And then they have a the payers first who fund the actual training and the project. And then if they demonstrate the outcome, then there'll be a second tier of investors, usually government related and also philanthropy who will then take that on board. And that's quite a common model for the social impact bond or the pay for success model. So that's one that we've seen. And of course, globally, there's been quite a few. I think I was just reading the Impact Revolution document. There's something like 118 what they call these development impact bonds or pay for success bonds, with 70 plus in development across 26 countries. So I'm sure there's more that I've just not come across.
Great, thank you. So Lee Han Shih, over to you now. The question around sourcing and how you like to be approached if a social enterprise wants to come speak to you about potential investment.
Well, anyone can talk to me. So, what we used to do pre-COVID is that we used to run 1 or 2 meetings in our office, up to about 40 to 50 people. And it's a very random selection. I believe in throwing everybody in the pot and see what comes out. So once out of the blue, we have 6 persons from Moscow, 5 of them couldn't speak English for nuts, who turned up at our meeting. But it's interesting because you learn from each other and then the words get around, so you get the deal flow. To be honest, the social enterprise impact investment community isn't very big. Once you know somebody really is only maybe 3 or 4 degrees of separation, words do get around. And well, we either grow organically or you want to put it haphazardly. But most of the time, it's always somebody who tell me something, or somebody, as a few of you have said before, or Mason, I think, somebody say recommend somebody to talk to me. So it's not a total effort out to look for new deals, really. And actually, at the moment, I make a deal with myself that I wouldn't invest more than 2 deals a year, and they have to be really closely aligned with what we're doing. So well, do talk to me, but please bear in mind that I only invest very sparingly and really close to what potato production are already doing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have another question here, and we're coming towards the final 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to, in a moment, I'll just read out the final question for you to reflect on. But my final reflection would be, or question for our panelists would be a general one, which is really what do you think are the factors that make the biggest difference for a successful investment versus perhaps a less successful or unsuccessful investment? So what is it that's differentiated? What are those key ingredients that have differentiated a success from a failure? And so that's first question. And the second is what is there any nugget of advice, golden sort of piece of advice you'd like to give our social impact enterprises on the call today in their efforts as they go on their journeys to raise capital? So 2 final questions to reflect on. I think we've got about a minute or so for each speaker. And then there's also just a question here in the chat box, which is around faith-based social impact initiatives. And the question as to whether or not faith-based or faith-oriented investments give greater, longer-lasting impact than non-faith-based ones. What is your views on that question around the role of faith and impact investment? We've heard one of the few areas where the Vatican has got involved globally in the investment movements. It's an interesting space, and of course we're also seeing the rise of Islamic finance and Islamic finance models as well. So it'd be interesting to hear your reflections on that question as well. So two questions, and then and then an optional reflection on the faith-based question to finish off our conversation today. So Alex, over to you.
Sure, maybe I'll start with the faith-based one. I was surprised that there's ever such a finding, but I think at the heart of the matter, a faith-based approach to investing would look something like this. On the part of the entrepreneur or on the part of the investor, it would almost entail a certain kind of sacrifice of disadvantaging the self to benefit the others, to benefit neighbor. And I find that's almost a transcendent cause. It's a cause that's much greater than self, that can be very powerful. So it's as if you are able to lay yourself on the line, your capital, your talents, your time, to seek an outcome that is much greater than yourself and go on for quite a long time. So it wouldn't surprise me, and I think history is littered with examples like this. I think even related or not, even the fall of apartheid in South Africa was started by an Episcopal minister that started to boycott companies that operated in South Africa, and that eventually led to the fall of apartheid. So I think the motivation that would put yourself down and for the benefit of others is a very powerful motivation. And these are the very people, entrepreneurs or investors, when they succeed, people around them actually rejoice with them, and that leads to rejoicing. And it's investing that makes the world rejoice. So I'll just pause here.
Well, thank you very much for that, Alex. Mason, over to you for your final reflections and thoughts on those questions.
Okay. I think I just want to backtrack a bit about what one of the question was, how do you define success? Actually, it depends on the type of investor that you are bringing in. Just to resonate along the line with Han Shih mentioned earlier, actually there's a lot of impact washing investor out there, meaning that they claim to be impact investor, but they are more interested in financial return. So I think it is important for the social entrepreneur to distinguish whether this so-called impact investor is really an impact investor. So let me give you an example of this. Some people claim, yes, I also look at social impact returns, not just financial return. But you have to ask a further question is, how much weighting does the investor put between a social impact return and a financial return? So for example, if the guy only say, oh, I only assign 10% weighting to social impact returns, and the remaining 90% is financial return. What it means is this: no matter how well you do in your social impact return, it doesn't matter to him, because he is looking at 90% focusing on return. But on the other hand, a healthy impact investor will probably assign 50-50. Again, this is hypothetical. So in a COVID-19 situation, while the investor will say, yes, financially you're not doing well, but social impact-wise, you're doing great because you continue to provide livelihood projects, livelihood income to the disadvantaged group. So this is something that I think this is something that you have to ask as you filter or interview different potential investor. Second area, the question was regarding what advice that I want to give to social enterprises. My advice is, don't just talk to the potential investor about your strength, but also your weaknesses and limitations. Oftentimes we talk to social entrepreneur, it seems like he can do everything. I say, if you can do everything, you don't need me. So I think we need to be very honest, but we recognize that many social entrepreneurs are not financially savvy. So this is where impact investor, our team is able to come in and provide financial advice and financial engineering restructuring to help to strengthen the financial sustainability of the business. And another advice is really I think it goes along with, I hope I speak on behalf of social impact investors, is that, we do have failures as well. We take risk meaning taking prepared to take losses, but we rather fail early and fail small. So I think this is involve our personal self-discipline as well. When we take risks, we rather fail early and fail small. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mason. I do like that. Fail early and fail small is a good mantra, I think, and encouraging enterprises on the call to get in touch early, to take those early risks, to test those innovations, will give you a greater chance of understanding whether or not they're going to be successful. Hui Hsing, perhaps I can come to you for some final reflections on those questions.
Yeah, we're sort of young impact investors, so let me borrow two things which I read and blend them together to deal with some of the questions that you've asked. One is from Jacqueline Novogratz, who's the founder of Acumen, and the second is Ronald Cohen, who's just released a book on impact and have been a big impact advocate for a while. And it goes something like this. Moral imagination is very important. So view other people's problems as if they were your own, connecting on a human level, analyzing the systemic issues at play, and then placing impact at the core of your decisions and actions. And this will help you create a business model that would balance the three attributes of risk, return, and impact, which is what all impact investors look at when we look at your businesses. What are the risks involved? What are the returns that financial, and what is the impact that you aim to deliver? So, cultivate your moral imagination and be an impact revolutionary and disrupt traditional negative impact businesses.
Great, thank you very much for those inspiring final words. And I'm going to go to Han Shih, for you have the final word from our panelists. So over to you.
Yeah, so I was born an Anglican and now I'm nothing. So I can't really comment very much on faith-based organization. But I think we talk a lot and there was very useful information here. But one thing we didn't talk about is user buy-in. You may have the best product or the best service, but if nobody wants to adopt it, then what's the point, right? That's where faith-based organization can come in. I'll just give you an example. In the 80s or the 90s, probably the 90s, Taiwan liberated its financial control. So suddenly everybody has 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 credit cards. So obviously there's a lot of default. And there's one credit card that has the minimal default. It's because every time you spend on that credit card, a very small amount goes to one of the biggest Buddhist organizations in Taiwan. So in a sense, when you do it, you accumulate karma. So obviously when you accumulate karma, you don't want to default on that. So that's a good way to get user buy-in. It's not exactly a religious thing, but it's really what is the pain point of your user and how do you get them to accept what you want to offer. And using faith is actually a good way. There's no, religion have done great good and great harm, so I'm not going to make much comment on that. But as a mechanism, it's a useful mechanism. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So we're now right at the end of our conversation this morning. So thank you to our panelists for your contributions and for sharing your insights into impact investment across Singapore and indeed Southeast Asia. And thank you also for giving some of your contact information there to our potential investees on the call. That's very generous of you. And also thanks to Alex for highlighting some of the key questions you'll be asking, which are also in the chat around when thinking about whether or not to invest. So thank you all for your contributions this morning. And thanks to everyone again who joined us this morning and for your contributions to our social enterprise landscape survey, which also includes a social finance chapter as well. So we're looking forward to launching that. So please stay tuned for the launch event. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you to tell you more about that in time. So I'm going to hand over now to Pauline just to wrap up today's webinar. But thanks once again. It's been a privilege to moderate today's conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers, for sharing, and thank you, Tristan, for moderating. If you have any further questions about anything that has been shared today, you can reach out to us at connect@soristic.asia. Last but not least, on behalf of the team at Soristic, I would like to thank you all for taking time to tune in to our social finance workshop today. Before you leave the meeting, can we ask that you fill in our feedback form by scanning the QR code on the screen or entering the link. My colleague has sent a link in the Zoom chat as well. Your feedback will go a very long way in helping us improve our future workshops and webinars. With that, thank you once again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.